On April 15, 1912, the richest man to board the Titanic stepped calmly into the cold Atlantic and drowned. His name was John Jacob Astor IV. He was worth $87 million, the single largest fortune to sink with that ship. But here's what almost nobody knows. His great-grandfather, a poor German butcher's son, had started with absolutely nothing, crossed the ocean with the clothes on his back, and built the very first great American fortune. This is the story of the Astor Dynasty, the family that invented old money in America, created New York's high society, and then quietly watched it all slip away. Most people think the story of American wealth starts with the Rockefellers or the Vanderbilts. It doesn't. It starts with a boy named Johann Jacob Astor, born in 1763 in a tiny German village called Waldorf, to a butcher who could barely afford to feed his family. Johann had almost no schooling, and by the time he was a teenager, his only skill was playing the flute and an aching hunger to get out. At 20, he took the biggest gamble of his life. He scraped together money for passage, boarded a ship to America, and landed in New York in 1783 with no English, no money, and no plan. All he had was a rumor he'd heard on the voyage, a rumor about fur. That rumor changed everything. John Jacob Astor, as he now called himself, learned that the American frontier was drowning in beaver pelts, and that wealthy Europeans would pay a fortune for them. He started as a simple fur trader, traveling the wilderness, dealing directly with trappers, cutting out the middlemen. Within years, he built the American Fur Company, a ruthless monopoly that stretched from New York to the Pacific to the very settlement that still bears his name, Astoria, Oregon. By the early 1800s, he was the undisputed king of the American fur trade. But Astor saw something even bigger coming, and it wasn't fur, it was land. Here's the move that made the Astor fortune truly immortal. While other tycoons were chasing gold and pelts, Astor looked at the small, swampy, growing city of New York and quietly bought up enormous tracts of land on the cheap. Farmland, marshland, empty lots north of the city. He held them, waited, and watched as New York exploded into the greatest city on earth. When he died in 1848, he was worth roughly $20 million, about 1/15 of all the wealth in the entire country. He was without question the richest man in America. And he'd done it by buying dirt and doing nothing but waiting. That is the purest definition of old money there is. But a fortune is only the beginning. The Astors spent the next century turning money into something far more powerful: status. The man who made this happen was a woman. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, known to all of New York simply as the Mrs. Astor, essentially invented American high society. She drew up the legendary list of the 400, the only families in New York worth knowing, and decided who was in and who was out. To be left off her list was social death. Her ballroom on Fifth Avenue became the most exclusive room in America, the throne room of the Gilded Age. Then came the rivalry that gave us one of the world's most famous hotels. Two branches of the family, the cousins John Jacob Astor III and William Waldorf-Astor, feuded for decades over who was the true heir to the Astor legacy. So each built his own towering hotel on Fifth Avenue to one-up the other. William Waldorf built the Waldorf, John Jacob III built the Astoria. Eventually the two towers were connected, and the combined Waldorf-Astoria became the grandest hotel on the planet, the symbol of old money at its peak. And that brings us back to the Titanic. John Jacob Astor, IV, great-grandson of the original, was the richest man on board that ship. He was wealthy, handsome, married to a beautiful young wife who was pregnant with their child. He could have taken any seat in any lifeboat, but he stepped aside, helped his wife into a boat, and stayed on deck as the ship went down. He was 47 years old, worth $87 million, and his body was recovered weeks later. The largest private fortune on the Titanic went down with him. Here's the part they don't tell you. Even after that tragedy, the Astors were still enormously wealthy. But the dynasty was quietly fading. Generation after generation, the fortune that had once been 1/15 of all American wealth was divided, diluted, and disconnected from the hard work and hunger that created it. The family that once owned half of Manhattan slowly sold it off. The Waldorf-Astoria was eventually sold, torn down, and replaced. By the 20th century, the Astor name had gone from the pinnacle of American wealth to a footnote in history books, a byword for what happens to a fortune in the hands of people who never had to build it. So what's the real lesson of the Astors? It's the same lesson every old money family in history eventually learns. A fortune built on hunger and hard work is powerful. A fortune passed to people who never knew that hunger is fragile. John Jacob Astor built one of the greatest fortunes in American history through pure force of will. His descendants turned it into parties, ballrooms, and hotels, and watched it dissolve. The mansions are museums now. The list of the 400 is a curiosity, and the name that once ruled New York is a whisper. The Astor story isn't really about money at all. It's about the difference between earning something and inheriting it, and why that difference over time is everything. If this story made you think about wealth differently, drop a comment. What do you think matters more, the size of the fortune or the person holding it? And if you want more deep dives into the families who built and lost the world's great fortunes, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll see you in the next one.